Transform Freetown is how we've described our 3-year plan to really address the challenges of our city. So a little bit of background. I wasn't a politician, never been in politics before, never been in public sector, but made this decision about 9 months prior to the election, primarily driven by a desire to have our city clean and to protect the environment. We live in an absolutely beautiful setting, the Atlantic Ocean on one side and mountains with forests surrounding the city, which is kind of nestled in between. Over the course of the last 10 years, increasingly, but really probably starting about 15 to 20 years before, that landscape is being destroyed. The trees have been, the hills have been deforested. The coastline has been damaged because climate change is impacting not only the city, but also the rural areas. In a country where 65% of the people are subsistence farmers, the impact of irregular rainfall, of flooding, of literally having the rain come when it shouldn't come and not come when it should, has meant that that's not the only factor. It's one of the factors, but there's been a significant increase in our city's population. And people have moved into the city, looking for places to live, damaging the natural environment, but also making themselves more vulnerable. So Transform Freetown is a comprehensive plan to address what those underlying challenges, but really also the symptoms as well as the cause. So that means we look at 4 clusters: resilience, human development, healthy city, and urban mobility. And within those 4 clusters, we look at 11 priority sectors, ranging from environmental management, coming through to job creation, to health, to sanitation, to water, to urban mobility itself. It's both a cluster and a sector of how people move around the city. And with all of this, we have at the heart of it an inclusive approach. So having community at the heart, data-driven, performance-led. And you mentioned Freetown, the Tree Town, which is the plan to plant 1 million trees, the plan which is under implementation. And so coming out of those 11 priority sectors are 19 specific targets. By meeting those targets, one of which is increasing vegetation cover by at least 50%, translates then into an initiative like Freetown, the Tree Town. But each of those 19 targets have between 3 to 4, giving us a total of about 37 specific initiatives, the sum of which, working together with partners and the residents of Freetown, will, by God's grace, lead to the transformation that we desperately need in our city. We answered on a number of levels. The first one is recognizing a recognition of the inequity, which pervades so much of the world, from trade to migration challenges to brain drain, so much. But in this particular context, as we talk about climate, we have this imbalance where the major emitters have more resilience to deal with, because we are all experiencing the impact of climate change. We've seen the floods in Europe, in China. We've seen as well the fires. So we know that it's happening everywhere. But the question is the resilience. It's having the systems in place, the resources in place to be able to withstand and rebuild very quickly. In contrast, with a continent that's emitting 0.55%, the impact is severe because the resilience isn't there. And so that's one piece, just recognizing and understanding that we have this disparity. The next issue then is really also when it comes to the difference between how you approach this from the perspective of a nation state and a city. And that's very important for all cities across the globe. But in the global south, it's even more of a challenge, because structurally, you invariably have more restricted mandates and less access to capital, but the impact is always felt on the ground. And I often say that across the world, every piece of soil that you're standing on is within the context or is within the jurisdiction of a local authority. It's obviously within the jurisdiction of a nation state as well, but the local authorities are closest to the people, and they're the first line responders. And if they don't have the access to the financing for mitigation and adaptation, and if they don't have the political mandates to enable this work to be done quickly, then the people who are the residents of those local authorities, the citizens of those nation states, are made more vulnerable, and the loss is greater, and the chances of recovery are slimmer. And then I want to come to a third very quickly. So what do we need? We need an appreciation of the imbalance. We need a recognition between global north and global south. We need a recognition that cities are at the forefront, and they need access to finance, and they need the political and the regulatory space to do this work. But finally, we also need to know that it's not one size fits all, and that should already be clear from what I've said before. And when it comes to these conversations about a green just transition, we have to recognize that some people are transitioning, some people are on a development trajectory, and that should not be stopped because of climate actions for which the big emitters are still not being true to their word. We need action now in terms of reducing the greenhouse gas emissions in order for us to meet the 1.5% target. But that action should not be at the cost of the development of those who are not the big emitters. When you're in the playground and a big kid has the ball, it's very hard for the little kid to get the ball. And as I said earlier, this imbalance is something which permeates so many aspects of the international frameworks and the systems within which we all exist and grow. The big kids have the ball. And when you talk about equity, I mean, let's just take COVID as a classic example. So much was said about vaccine equity. So much was said in advance, whilst the vaccines were still being developed, of making sure that we recognize that we're not going to succeed with eradicating COVID or really controlling COVID if there are huge percentages of the world's population that may remain unvaccinated. And what has happened? This is precisely what we've seen with countries going on to boosters when other countries have not had access even to the first doses of the vaccine. Now, I think what's important for us all to note with some, I don't think it's that it's not been heard. No, I don't think so at all. Because these conversations, like with the COVID vaccinations, are being had right across the globe. They're being had at the UN, they're being had within the Bretton Woods institutions. They're being heard, they're being had, and they're being heard. This is a question of choice. And as I said, when the big kid has the ball, sometimes it takes something outside of the decision that kid is going to make for them to decide, okay, let's all play, because if not, the teacher's going to come and take the ball away, and then no one's going to have the ball. And what we have with climate, this climate emergency, the expression leave no one behind, very well utilized. It's all over the place. How real is it? Not very. But then again, here we were 30 years ago talking about climate emergency. And 30 years on, all we've seen is emissions increase. During the COVID, the worst of the pandemic, we all spoke and cities really led the clarion call. We need a green, just recovery. I saw data recently that seems to indicate that our post-COVID, post-pandemic emissions have actually exceeded 2019. So are we not hearing they're choices that are being made every day. So this question of where the emerging economies are vis-a-vis, the big emitters, and decisions around how we ensure that we actually do address the climate crisis in a way which does not stymie the already stymied and challenged growth of billions of people on this planet. It's the same, we need to be addressed in the same way that we address this question of, are we really going to keep on going in this decade, which is declared to be our last opportunity? Are we really just going to keep on going without making the necessary policy adjustments? So far, not so good based on the data.